Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tim, and tonight I'm going to talk about some interesting facts about the Castlevania franchise that I either recently learned or have known over the years, and just thought they would be interesting to share after having a conversation with somebody who was really kind of entranced by things that I was talking about, and was like, you know what? Maybe I know a little more than I thought I did, and other people would be interested in hearing the same things. So, here we go. To kick it off would be the first one, which is about Castlevania Dracula X, the Super Nintendo game that released in 1995, using assets from the PC Engine version of Rondo of Blood. Now, famously, this version, if you were to consider it a port of Rondo of Blood, wouldn't come close to stacking up to that game. But it wasn't originally intended to be a port, and even when it released, it wasn't intended to be a port of that game either. However, the game in 1995, while under development at Konami by a team not led by any of the previous Castlevania teams, was building a game using the assets from Rondo of Blood. In 1995, there was an earthquake in Kobe, Japan, where this studio was headquartered. Due to that earthquake, they lost a lot of data during the destruction of their offices. This also meant that Konami lost a lot of money, so they needed to still release this game to try to recoup some of that lost revenue, but it lost significant amounts of development. What we ended up getting was a very rushed version of what that team was originally planning. The game was going to be longer, more open, similar to its counterpart on the PC Engine, but with the time constraints and the lost data from the earthquake, we ended up getting what we famously got. The rest is history. The next comes from Symphony of the Night, a game that is likely the most recognizable at this point in the entire franchise. In the Japanese version of Symphony of the Night, there was a sixth familiar. It was the Nose Devil. The Nose Devil basically looked very much like the standard devil, but with a comically long and large nose. This was actually a parody of a character from the anime Yatterman, and while the familiar was removed for the US release, the voice lines and data are still very much on the disc and have been data mined out. The next one is actually kind of interesting. This is one I recently learned about, and that is Hideo Kojima's cameo in the franchise before he would later go on to help produce the reboot, Lords of Shadow. So Kojima was famously known to be a big fan of the Castlevania franchise. In his 1988 cyberpunk adventure game, Snatcher, you can actually see Simon Belmont and Dracula hanging out in a strip club, which was called the Outer Heaven Club, in the background. Pretty interesting fact, right? Next fact, the miserable pile of secrets. That line was not written by any writer for Konami. No, that is actually a quote from a French novelist and politician named André Malraux. And it was written in his 1967 and it was written in his 1967 essay Anti-Memoirs. I'm sure I just pronounced that wrong because it's French. I probably pronounced his name wrong as well, but I'm American and it's expected of us to be stupid. Next is Castlevania II Simon's Quest, the Graveyard Duck. There is a famous mistranslation in this game of many that there are, but the most confusing was likely the NPC that tells you, wait for a soul with a graveyard duck. Now, how many people actually went looking for a duck in the graveyards? Well, more than you probably believe, as this has become kind of an urban legend that has taken on a life of its own. Even though now, with better translations and fan makes, the truth ended up becoming revealed, and it's not as interesting as one may think. Now, duck, as it turns out, was a mistranslation of the word doke, a Japanese word for get out of the way or move. The hint was actually telling you to wait for the ferryman so that you can cross the river. And here's another one for Symphony of the Night. The secret song track that's on it. If you were to put Symphony of the Night into a CD player and not the PlayStation, you'll be treated with a single track. Now, when you go to play this, Alucard's voice comes on and tells you that this is not a CD and listening to this track might damage your speakers. But after the warning, if you wait a little bit, an upbeat remix starts to play that is found nowhere else in the game. Only on that hidden track if you put it into that player. And honestly, most people probably don't even have a CD player at this point anymore, so That one's probably lost to many at this point without having to look it up online. And now all the way to the first Castlevania. Notoriously, the creator of the franchise was a huge horror fan, very much so of the Universal monster movies. The end of the game, developers weren't allowed to put their actual names into the credits as part of a deal because Konami did not want other companies poaching their developers. So instead, they used the names of famous horror icons for the credits. You had Christopher B., who was Christopher Lee. You had Bela Lugosi, who was Bela Lugosi. And you had Boris Karloff, who was supposed to be Boris Karloff. Pretty interesting. The next fact is a game that people are now finding out about, but was very much kept under wraps and hidden, much like a lot of projects that were in the later development years of the Dreamcast. And by later, I literally mean pretty much the second year of development for the Dreamcast, as Sega famously decided to stop producing the console in 2000, saying they had enough to sell, which just really plummeted the console. Everyone stopped buying it, developers completely stopped developing their games and shelved them, and the rest is history. Which is a shame because the Dreamcast still stands as my personal favorite console. But Konami was actually developing their first 3D Castlevania game for the Sega Dreamcast. Now, this game was going to star Sonia Belmont and Victor Belmont, Sonia Belmont being from the Game Boy Castlevania Legends game. It was supposed to be set during the French Revolution, and it actually looked very promising. But ultimately it was cancelled due to the reasons I just spoke about, and Konami shifting their focus to the PlayStation 2, which again, as history would go on, probably proved to be the right thing to do, although it left us Dreamcast fans incredibly disappointed when we found this out years later. Here's a little bit more from Symphony of the Night. One of the optional bosses, Galamoth, he's not from the mainstay or the mainline Castlevania games. No, he's actually from Kid Dracula, which was first released in the US as part of the Castlevania Anniversary Collection. Akamaju Special Boku Dracula-kun. It's a fun, very fun, cutesy little side-scrolling game. There was a Game Boy version, there was a Famicom version. You can now play it here in the US on the Anniversary Collection, and that's where Galamoth comes from. And still sticking here with Symphony of the Night, because this game just has so much going on around it. It's kind of fun just to keep going about it. Famously, there's an item in the game called the Duplicator that can give you an infinite use of any consumable in the game. Now, it costs 500,000 gold. It's a lot of gold, that's a lot of farming. However, you can just do library jumping. What library jumping was, using the gravity boots to repeatedly hit the librarian, which will cause him to drop secret items. And you can use gravity boots to repeatedly hit the librarian from below, which causes him to drop rare items, which will eventually lead to farming gold much faster. And to finish it off, this one I also recently found out, and kudos to anybody who's done this, because I already find Chronicles to be an incredibly difficult game, or at least the Sharp X68000 version of the game, as opposed to which is on the PlayStation version of Castlevania Chronicles, but not the remix one. Now, every time you beat the game, it famously has a hidden difficulty setting that goes up each time. By the time you get to the 7th playthrough, the game becomes the Zenith, a mode that is so difficult that most people don't even bother trying to speedrun it or even getting through it once they get to it. And you know what? I kind of want to see if I can get to it using save states. I'll just say the quiet part out loud. I'll use save states to try to get there, but I'm really curious to see this Zenith mode, because apparently monster placements are radically different. Their movements are different. It's like they changed the whole game, so I'm very curious to see about that. And that is all I have for this evening, so thank you for watching. Hopefully you learned a new fun fact about the franchise, but enough talk. Have a good evening.